The year is 1683, and 250,000 soldiers are marching toward one city. Their cannons shake the earth, their banners stretch as far as the eye can see, and their commander has one simple message for the people trapped inside: surrender or die. Inside those walls, barely 11,000 defenders look out at the greatest army Europe has ever seen and make a decision that will echo through history. They're going to fight. What happens next isn't just a battle, it's the moment that decides the fate of Western civilization. Welcome back to From Start to Now, where we take you through the most incredible true stories in history. And trust me, what you're about to hear sounds impossible. How does a city with 11,000 soldiers hold off 300,000 of the Ottoman Empire's finest warriors? How do you fight when you're outnumbered almost 30-1? Today, we're diving deep into the Siege of Vienna, a battle so epic, so desperate, and so important that it literally changed the course of human history. So hit that subscribe button, because this is going to be one wild ride. Let's set the stage. The Ottoman Empire, in 1683, is at the absolute height of its power. We're talking about an empire that stretches from the gates of Vienna all the way to the Persian Gulf, from the shores of North Africa to the Caucasus Mountains. This isn't just an empire, it's a superpower. For 2 centuries, the Ottomans have been expanding relentlessly into Europe, conquering everything in their path. They've taken Constantinople, they've crushed the Byzantines, they've pushed deep into Hungary, and now they have their eyes set on the ultimate prize, Vienna, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. And leading this massive invasion is Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, one of the most ambitious men in Ottoman history. This guy doesn't just want to take Vienna, he wants to conquer all of Central Europe, maybe even march on Rome itself. He's assembled the largest Ottoman army ever gathered for a single campaign. We're talking about somewhere between 250,000 to 300,000 men, depending on which historical sources you trust. Either way, it's enormous. There are elite janissaries, those legendary warrior slaves trained from childhood to be the ultimate fighting force. There are cavalry units from across the empire, Tatars, Wallachians, Moldavians, and thousands upon thousands of regular soldiers. They have hundreds of cannons, siege equipment that can reduce stone walls to rubble, and they have something else too: absolute confidence that they're going to win. Now, inside Vienna, things look pretty grim. The city has about 11,000 soldiers to defend it. 11,000. Let that sink in for a moment. Some historians put the number slightly higher, maybe 15,000, if you count every able-bodied man who could hold a weapon. But even with that generous estimate, they're still outnumbered more than 20-1. The man in charge of the defense is Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, a seasoned military commander who knows exactly how bad the situation is. He's got his garrison, a mix of professional soldiers, local militia, and armed citizens who've decided they'd rather die fighting than surrender to what they believe will be slavery or worse. But here's where it gets interesting. Vienna isn't completely alone. The Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I has fled the city. The emperor actually abandoned Vienna when he heard the Ottomans were coming, but he's out there trying to rally support from the rest of Europe. He's calling on every Christian kingdom, every prince, every duke who might send help. The problem is, help is far away, and the Ottomans are already at the gates. The siege begins on July 14, 1683. The Ottoman army arrives and completely surrounds Vienna. When I say surrounds, I mean they form a ring of soldiers, tents, cannons, and siege works that stretches for miles. The people of Vienna look out from their walls and see what looks like an entire nation camped outside their city. The Ottomans don't attack immediately. They do what any smart besieging army does: they start digging. They dig trenches that move closer and closer to the walls. They dig tunnels underneath the fortifications. They set up their massive cannons and begin the slow, methodical work of pounding Vienna's defenses into dust. And here's something most people don't know about sieges in this era. They're brutal, not just for the defenders but for everyone. Inside Vienna, food starts running low almost immediately. The city was supposed to have supplies for a long siege, But with so many refugees who fled into the city for protection, those supplies dwindle faster than anyone expected. Water becomes contaminated, disease starts spreading. Every day defenders die not from Ottoman bullets, but from dysentery, from infected wounds, from exhaustion. And every single day those Ottoman trenches get closer, and those cannons keep firing. Count Starhemberg knows he's in an impossible situation. He can't sally out and fight the Ottoman army in the open, that would be suicide. He can't negotiate, the Ottomans aren't interested in anything less than complete surrender. His only hope is to hold on long enough for reinforcements to arrive. So he does something incredible. He organizes the defense so efficiently, so intelligently, that he manages to make those 11,000 men feel like 50,000. He sets up rotating shifts so soldiers get rest. He has citizens working around the clock to repair walls that the Ottoman cannons damage during the day. He personally walks the walls, showing himself to his men, keeping morale up even when things look hopeless. The Ottomans, meanwhile, are getting frustrated. Kara Mustafa expected Vienna to fall in a few weeks. He thought the defenders would see his enormous army and lose heart. But week after week passes, and Vienna still stands. His tunneling teams dig under the walls and pack the tunnels with explosives. When they detonate these mines, massive sections of wall collapse in thunderous explosions, ions that can be heard for miles. The Ottomans rush forward to exploit these breaches, and every single time the Viennese defenders meet them with desperate, ferocious resistance. They fight in the rubble, hand to hand, with swords and pikes, and anything they can use as weapons. They drive the Ottomans back, then work through the night to build makeshift barricades where the walls used to be. One of the most intense moments of the siege comes in early September. The Ottomans have been attacking for nearly 2 months straight. They've breached the walls in multiple places. Parts of Vienna are literally burning. The defenders are down to their last reserves of food and ammunition. Count Starhemberg sends out a desperate message to Emperor Leopold. If help doesn't arrive in the next few days, Vienna will fall. There's simply no way they can hold out any longer. The soldiers are exhausted, the civilians are starving, and the Ottomans show no signs of giving up. But here's where our story takes an incredible turn. Because while Vienna has been fighting for its life, something remarkable has been happening across Europe. Emperor Leopold hasn't been sitting idle. He's been calling in every favor, making every promise, begging every Christian ruler to send help. And slowly, almost miraculously, an army has been gathering. The Holy Roman Empire sends troops. The Kingdom of Poland under King John III Sobieski sends an army. Various German states contribute soldiers. Even the Pope sends money and blessings. By early September, a relief force of about 70,000 soldiers has assembled on the Danube River, just outside Vienna. Now, 70,000 sounds like a lot, and is, but remember, they're still facing an Ottoman force that's 3 or 4 times larger. But this relief army has something the Ottomans don't expect: the largest cavalry force assembled in Europe in generations. King Sobieski of Poland has brought the famous Polish Winged Hussars, probably the most terrifying cavalry unit in the world at that time. These guys wear wings on their armor that make a screaming sound when they charge. They're heavily armored, incredibly skilled, and they've never lost a major battle. On September 11th, the relief army arrives at the Kahlenberg Heights, the hills overlooking Vienna. They can see the entire siege laid out below them. They can see the Ottoman camps, the trenches, the batteries of cannons, and they can see Vienna itself, battered, burning in places, but still flying its banners, still unconquered. The various Christian commanders meet to plan their attack, and this is where King Sobieski takes charge. He's not just a king, he's one of the greatest military minds of his generation. He looks at the battlefield, and he sees exactly what needs to happen. The plan is elegant but risky. The relief army will descend from the heights and attack the Ottoman positions from behind. While they do this, Count Starhemberg and the Vienna garrison will sally out from the city and attack from the front. The Ottomans will be caught between 2 forces. But here's the thing: this plan only works if everything goes perfectly. If the Ottomans managed to turn their massive army around and concentrate their forces, they could destroy the relief army piece by piece. Speed and surprise are everything. September 12, 1683. This is the day. Early in He morning, the Christian forces begin their descent from the Kahlenberg. The Ottomans spot them and start repositioning their troops. But they're not too worried yet. They still have overwhelming numbers. Kara Mustafa figures he can beat back this relief force, then return to finishing off Vienna. He doesn't realize that he's about to face one of the most devastating cavalry charges in military history. The battle rages all day. The Christian infantry clashes with Ottoman forces across a wide front. The fighting is brutal, confused, and desperate. Casualties mount on both sides. For hours it's not clear who's winning. The Ottomans have the numbers, but the Christian forces have the high ground and momentum. And then, late in the afternoon, King Sobieski decides the moment has come. He's been holding his cavalry back, waiting for exactly the right instant. Now he sees it. Sobieski assembles the largest cavalry charge in history, 20,000 horsemen. Think about that for a second. 20,000 cavalry, including 3,000 Polish Winged Hussars at the center. He positions them at the top of a slope overlooking the main Ottoman positions. And then he gives the order to charge. What happens next is something out of legend. 20,000 horses begin moving down the slope, picking up speed. The ground literally shakes. The Winged Hussars' wings make their signature screaming sound. Ottoman soldiers look up and see this avalanche of steel and horseflesh coming straight at them. And for the first time in this entire siege, they feel fear. The charge hits the Ottoman lines like a hammer hitting glass. The Ottoman formations shatter. Soldiers start running. Carefully constructed trenches and siege works that took months to build become death traps as cavalry pour through them. Inside Vienna, Count Starhemberg hears the sounds of battle changing. He realizes the relief force has arrived. Even though his soldiers are exhausted, even though many can barely stand from hunger and fatigue, he orders the gates opened and leads a sortie out of the city. The Vienna garrison, these men who have held off 300,000 Ottomans for 2 months, charge into the Ottoman rear positions with everything they have left. The Ottoman army collapses. This massive force that seemed invincible just hours ago begins to disintegrate. Soldiers flee in every direction. Kara Mustafa tries to rally his men, but it's hopeless. The combination of the cavalry charge, the Vienna sortie, and the sheer shock of seeing their invincible army broken sends the Ottomans into full retreat. They abandon their camps, their cannons, their supplies, everything. The retreat turns into a rout. Ottoman soldiers throw away their weapons and run. Some historical accounts say they didn't stop running for days. The Christian forces pursue them, but they don't chase too far. They're exhausted too, and besides, there's something more important to do. They need to save Vienna. Soldiers from the relief army enter the city, and what they see breaks their hearts. The defenders are skeletal from hunger. The streets are filled with rubble. Bodies are everywhere. But Vienna still stands. Against impossible odds, against the greatest siege army ever assembled, this city held on just long enough to be saved. King Sobieski enters Vienna to thunderous celebration. He's treated as the savior of Christianity, which, in a way, he is. If Vienna had fallen, there was nothing to stop the Ottomans from pushing deeper into Europe. Poland would have been next, then the German states, maybe France. The entire balance of power in Europe would have shifted. Instead, the Ottomans suffered one of the worst defeats in their history. The aftermath of the battle is almost as significant as the battle itself. The Ottomans left behind enormous amounts of treasure in their abandoned camps. The Christians captured so much gold, silver, jewels, and supplies that it took days to inventory everything. King Sobieski sent some of the captured Ottoman banners to the Pope with a letter paraphrasing Julius Caesar, "I came, I saw, God conquered." That's the kind of moment we're talking about here. For the Ottoman Empire, Vienna was a turning point. They never recovered their reputation for invincibility. The defeat shocked the entire Islamic world. Within a few years, a coalition of European powers went on the offensive and began pushing the Ottomans out of Hungary and the Balkans. The empire that had been expanding for 200 years suddenly found itself in retreat, a retreat that in a way continued for the next 2 centuries until the empire finally collapsed after World War I. For Vienna and the defenders who held those walls, life slowly returned to normal. The city was rebuilt. Count Starhemberg was celebrated as a hero, rightfully so. The soldiers who survived were honored, but the cost had been terrible. Thousands of defenders died during the siege. Thousands more civilians perished from disease, starvation, and the constant bombardment. The city bore the scars of the siege for years. There's something deeply human about this story that I think we need to talk about. When you read about 11,000 defenders facing 300,000 attackers, it's easy to turn it into just numbers, just a historical fact. But think about what that actually means. Think about being a soldier on those walls, looking out every single morning at an army so vast you can't see the end of it. Think about knowing that if you fail, your entire civilization might crumble. Think about being so hungry you can barely stand, so exhausted you're hallucinating, but still picking up your weapon and going to the walls because what else can you do? This is one of those moments in history where regular people did something extraordinary. The soldiers who held Vienna weren't all elite troops. Many were just citizens who grabbed whatever weapons they could find. They weren't fighting for glory or treasure. They were fighting because their families were behind them, because their world was behind them, and because giving up simply wasn't an option. There's something timeless about that kind of courage. And on the other side, let's not forget the human element there too. The Ottoman soldiers weren't monsters, they were men following orders, men who believed they were on the right side of history. When that cavalry charge shattered their lines, those were real people running in terror, real families back home who would get news that their sons and fathers weren't coming back. War is a tragedy even when your side wins. The Battle of Vienna also gives us insight into how history really works. We like to think of history as inevitable, as if everything had to happen exactly the way it did. But Vienna shows us how fragile historical moments can be. If Count Starhemberg had been a less capable commander, Vienna falls in August, and we live in a completely different world. If King Sobieski had arrived a day later, Vienna falls, and we live in a completely different world. If one of 100 small decisions had gone differently, the entire future of Europe changes. History isn't a predetermined story. It's a series of moments where real people make choices that ripple forward for centuries. And here's something interesting to think about. The Battle of Vienna echoes through popular culture in ways you might not realize. When Vienna was saved, the Ottomans left behind sacks of coffee beans, something most Europeans had never seen before. Viennese merchants started the first coffee houses in Central Europe, using these captured beans. So next time you're in a coffee shop, you're participating in a tradition that started because of this battle. There's also a legend that croissants were invented to celebrate the victory, the crescent shape representing the Ottoman flag being eaten. That story is probably not true, but it's a fun piece of folklore that shows how deeply this battle embedded itself in European consciousness. The siege also influenced military thinking for generations. It became a case study in defensive warfare. Military academies studied how Count Starhemberg managed to hold out so long with so few men. They analyzed King Sobieski's cavalry tactics. The battle proved that fortified cities, when properly defended, could resist even overwhelming force. It also proved that cavalry, when used correctly at the decisive moment, could still be the king of the battlefield. These lessons influenced European warfare for the next century. Let's talk about some of the myths and misconceptions around this battle, because there are plenty. One common myth is that this was entirely a religious war, Christianity versus Islam. While religion was certainly a factor, and both sides used religious rhetoric, the reality was more complicated. The Ottomans had Christian vassals fighting in their army. Some Christian states stayed neutral, or even supported the Ottomans, because of political rivalries with the Habsburgs. Religion provided the language and justification for the war, but politics, territory, and power were just as important. Another misconception is that the Ottomans were incompetent or that Kara Mustafa was a bad commander. Actually, the Ottoman siege tactics were sophisticated and nearly successful. They did everything right, according to the military doctrine of the time. They isolated the city, they systematically weakened the defenses, and they came very close to winning. Kara Mustafa's main mistake was underestimating how long the defenders would hold out and not being prepared for the relief army's arrival. He also possibly made a tactical error in not completely fortifying his own camp against attack from outside, but hindsight is always perfect. The reality is, the Ottomans were a professional, skilled military force that happened to face an equally skilled enemy at a moment when everything went wrong. We should also talk about the fate of Kara Mustafa himself, because it's pretty dark. When he returned to the Ottoman capital after the defeat, Sultan Mehmed IV was not pleased. In the Ottoman system, failure on this scale wasn't just embarrassing, it was unforgivable. Kara Mustafa was executed by strangulation with a silk cord on December 25, 1683. His head was delivered to the Sultan. It's a reminder of how brutal the stakes were in this era, not just on the battlefield but in the politics behind it. The human stories from inside Vienna during the siege are fascinating and heartbreaking. There are accounts of women and children helping to defend the walls, carrying ammunition, caring for the wounded, and even fighting when breaches occurred. There are stories of soldiers sharing their last scraps of food with starving civilians. There are accounts of priests leading prayers in churches, even as cannonballs crashed through the roofs. There's a sense of community, of people banding together in the face of annihilation that's really moving when you read the primary sources. One account that always stays with me is from a soldier who described the moment they heard the relief army's cannon fire in the distance. After 2 months of feeling abandoned, of fighting alone against impossible odds, suddenly they knew help was coming. He said grown men wept openly on the walls, not from despair but from hope. Can you imagine that moment? Can you imagine going from absolute desperation to the possibility of survival? It must have felt like a miracle. The strategic importance of Vienna in 1683 can't be overstated. It wasn't just another city. Vienna was the capital of the Habsburg Empire, the seat of the Holy Roman Emperor, and the gateway to Central Europe. If Vienna fell, the entire Habsburg power structure might have collapsed. Poland would have been surrounded. The German states would have been exposed. The Ottomans would have controlled the Danube River, one of Europe's most important trade and military routes. We're not exaggerating when we say the fate of Western Europe hung in the balance. There's also an interesting technological aspect to this battle. The Ottomans had superior numbers, and their siege technology was roughly equal to European technology of the time. What made the difference wasn't a technological advantage, it was tactics, leadership, and timing. The Polish cavalry charge was devastating not because of superior weapons, but because of superior strategy and execution. Count Starhemberg's defense succeeded not because of better cannons, but because of better organization and morale management. Sometimes in history, human factors matter more than material factors. The religious dimension of the battle, while not the only factor, was genuinely significant to the people involved. For the defenders of Vienna, this was understood as a fight for Christian Europe against Islamic expansion. For the Ottomans, this was jihad, holy war to expand the house of Islam. These religious frameworks gave meaning and motivation to soldiers on both sides. When modern historians downplay the religious element, they're not wrong to point out the political and economic factors, but they risk missing how the people at the time actually understood what they were fighting for. After Vienna, the European powers formed the Holy League, a coalition dedicated to driving the Ottomans out of Europe. Over the next 16 years, they conducted a series of campaigns that recaptured Hungary, parts of the Balkans, and pushed the Ottoman border back hundreds of miles. The Battle of Vienna was the beginning of what historians call the Ottoman retreat from Europe, a process that continued on and off for the next 200 years. By the time World War I ended in 1918 and the Ottoman Empire was dissolved, the empire controlled only Anatolia and a small portion of Europe around Constantinople. The territorial high water mark was Vienna in 1683. Everything after that was slow decline. Let's consider a counterfactual for a moment. What if Vienna had fallen? If the Ottomans had conquered Vienna in the summer of 1683, before the relief army arrived, the entire map of Europe would look different today. The Habsburg Empire would have been crippled or destroyed. The Ottoman Empire would have controlled Central Europe and likely expanded further west. The balance of power between Christian and Islamic civilizations would have shifted dramatically. The Enlightenment, which was just beginning in the late 1600s, might have developed differently or not at all. The colonial expansion of European powers around the world, which intensified in the 1700s, might have been delayed or taken different forms. We might be living in a world where Istanbul, not London or Paris or Vienna, is the cultural and political center of Europe. This is speculation, of course, but it shows you how pivotal this battle was. The story of the Battle of Vienna also reminds us about the role of individual leadership in history. Count Starhemberg and King Sobieski weren't inevitabilities. These were specific men with specific skills who happened to be in the right place at the right time. If Vienna's defense had been commanded by someone less capable, or if the relief army had been led by someone less decisive than Sobieski, outcomes could have been very different. History is shaped by systems and forces, yes, but it's also shaped by individuals who rise to meet extraordinary moments. One of the most powerful aspects of this story is how it demonstrates the psychology of defense versus offense. The Ottomans had every advantage except one. The defenders knew they had no choice but to win. The Ottomans could lose this battle and retreat back to their vast empire. The defenders of Vienna had nowhere to retreat. Their families were in the city. Their entire world was behind those walls. That kind of existential desperation creates a different kind of soldier. It's not that defenders are always braver than attackers, but there's something about fighting with your back against the wall that can bring out almost superhuman endurance. As we wrap up this incredible story, I want you to think about what it means. At its core, this is a story about people refusing to give up even when logic says they should. It's a story about the power of hope, the importance of leadership, and the way individual courage can, when multiplied across thousands of people, accomplish the impossible. The soldiers on the walls of Vienna in September 1683 had every reason to surrender. They were starving, exhausted, outnumbered, and outgunned. But they didn't. They held on for one more day, and then another, until help arrived. This is one of those stories from history that sounds too incredible to be true, but it is true. It really happened. 11,000 really did hold off 300,000. A city really was saved at the last possible moment by the largest cavalry charge in history. And the fate of Western civilization really did hang in the balance on those walls in that late summer of 1683. If you enjoyed this journey through one of history's most incredible military moments, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to From Start to Now if you haven't already, because we've got so many more amazing stories to explore together. Drop a comment and let me know. What historical battle or event should we cover next? What stories from the past do you want to see brought to life? The Battle of Vienna reminds us that history isn't just dates and names.